This week, one city stood completely still. This week, one city stood completely still. Flights vanished from the skies above Tehran. Major highways were shut down. Security forces flooded the streets. Millions gathered in black, marching behind a single coffin. Governments close roads for parades. They close airports for wars. But shutting down an entire capital for a funeral? That tells you this wasn't just about honoring a man. It was about sending a message to Iran's own people, a message to its rivals, and a message to the rest of the world. Because beneath the chants, the flags, and the carefully choreographed images lies a much larger question. What happens when the face of a nation's leadership disappears, but the uncertainty remains? Tonight, we're looking beyond the ceremony itself. We'll examine why this funeral became an international event, why global powers are watching every move, and why the outcome could shape the next phase of one of the Middle East's most dangerous confrontations. From above, the images were extraordinary. Rivers of people filled Tehran's streets. Black flags stretched for miles. Religious chants echoed through the capital as enormous portraits of Iran's leadership overlooked the procession. State television presented the event as a symbol of national unity and resilience. Supporters described it as proof that the Islamic Republic remains strong despite months of conflict and international pressure. But major state ceremonies like this rarely serve only one purpose. They are acts of remembrance, they are displays of power, and they are political messages carefully designed for audiences both inside and outside the country. Every camera angle, every speech, every symbol is chosen with intention. Funerals for national leaders often become defining political moments. History shows that they can reassure a nation or expose uncertainty. During periods of conflict, symbolism becomes almost as important as military strength. A government wants citizens to believe its institutions remain stable. Its allies want reassurance. Its rivals look for signs of weakness. That is why ceremonies like this attract worldwide attention. They are not simply moments of mourning. They are moments where governments attempt to shape perception before the next chapter begins. And in today's world, perception can influence diplomacy, financial markets, military planning, and public opinion just as much as events on the battlefield. While much of the world's attention focused on the funeral procession, another story continued unfolding behind the scenes. Diplomatic negotiations remain fragile. Regional tensions have not disappeared. Military forces across the Middle East continue operating under heightened alert. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most strategically important waterways. Hezbollah, Israel, the United States, Gulf states, and regional mediators all continue to calculate their next moves. The funeral may dominate headlines today, but it is only one chapter in a much larger geopolitical story. And understanding that story requires looking beyond the ceremony itself. Because once the cameras leave, the difficult questions remain. Who holds real influence? What comes next? And could this moment reshape the balance of power across the Middle East? That is exactly where our story begins. At first glance, this looked like a traditional state funeral. Millions gathered. Religious leaders stood at the center of the ceremony. Military commanders lined the procession. State media broadcast every moment live. But experienced geopolitical analysts often ask a different question. Instead, because every authoritarian government understands one simple reality. Power isn't only exercised through weapons, it's exercised through perception. If people believe the leadership is united, the state appears stable. If they believe uncertainty is growing, even a powerful government can begin to look vulnerable. That is why public ceremonies matter so much during times of crisis. They're designed to project confidence even when difficult decisions are being made behind closed doors. Behind the scenes, diplomats, intelligence agencies, and foreign governments are asking the same question. Leadership transitions are among the most sensitive moments for any political system. They create uncertainty, they invite speculation, and they force governments to reassure both domestic audiences and foreign rivals that command structures remain intact. Officials insist that Iran's institutions continue to function normally, but outside observers are closely watching every public appearance, every official statement, and every diplomatic move for clues about how power is being exercised. Because in geopolitics, uncertainty can be just as influential as certainty. History repeatedly shows that symbols can become strategic tools. Large military parades, national ceremonies, mass public gatherings. These events send signals far beyond national borders. Supporters interpret them as demonstrations of strength. Opponents study them for signs of weakness. Neutral countries look for clues about future negotiations. The funeral in Tehran was no exception. Every image broadcast around the world carried multiple messages. One audience was domestic, another was international, and perhaps the most important audience was sitting inside government offices thousands of miles away, carefully analyzing every detail. The ceremony may have dominated global headlines, but the underlying tensions never disappeared. Across the Middle East, military forces remain on heightened alert. Diplomatic channels continue operating behind closed doors. Regional allies are reassessing their strategies. Global energy markets remain sensitive to any escalation. The funeral itself changes none of those realities. If anything, it reminds the world how fragile the current situation remains. Because once the final speeches end, once the crowds return home, governments still face the same difficult questions they faced before the procession began. How can another regional war be prevented? Can diplomacy succeed before another crisis unfolds? Or is this simply a pause before the next chapter begins? Those questions lead directly to the most strategically important location in this entire conflict. Not a capital city, not a military base, but a narrow stretch of water that helps power the global economy. And that is where our story goes next. While millions watched the funeral in Tehran, financial traders around the world were focused on something entirely different. It wasn't a speech, a military parade, or even the headlines dominating television screens. Their attention was fixed on a narrow strip of water, only 21 miles wide. Most people will never visit it or even think about it, yet it quietly influences the price of fuel, the stability of economies, and the direction of global politics. That place is the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it doesn't seem remarkable. It's simply a narrow passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. But appearances can be misleading. Every single day, millions of barrels of crude oil and massive quantities of liquefied natural gas pass through this corridor before reaching markets across Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. As long as that flow continues uninterrupted, global markets remain relatively calm. But the moment that flow is threatened, the consequences can spread across continents within hours. Think of the Strait of Hormuz as the world's most important energy highway. Unlike highways on land, there are very few alternative routes. Oil tankers carrying critical energy supplies cannot simply choose another path. They have no choice but to pass through this narrow channel. That simple geographic reality gives the region extraordinary strategic importance. It explains why naval forces from multiple countries maintain a constant presence nearby, why intelligence agencies closely monitor every development, and why insurance companies carefully assess every incident that occurs in these waters. Even a single military confrontation has the potential to push oil prices higher almost instantly. Markets don't wait for wars to end. They react to uncertainty, and sometimes uncertainty alone is enough to move billions of dollars in a single day. Military power is only one form of influence. Economic leverage can be just as powerful. Throughout history, nations have understood that controlling key trade routes can dramatically increase their strategic importance. Geography itself can become a political weapon. The Strait of Hormuz is a perfect example of that reality. Every diplomatic negotiation, every military exercise, and every naval deployment in the region is ultimately measured against one critical question. Will energy continue flowing safely through these waters? The answer affects far more than the Middle East. It influences inflation, transportation costs, manufacturing, airlines, supply chains, and ultimately the cost of everyday life for millions of people around the world. This is exactly why the United States, European nations, Gulf countries, China, and many other major economies pay such close attention to developments in the Gulf. Their political interests may differ, but they all share one common objective. They want international shipping to remain open and secure. A prolonged disruption would no longer be a regional issue. It would become a global economic crisis. That is why diplomacy and military deterrence often operate side by side. While warships patrol these waters, diplomats continue private discussions behind closed doors, searching for ways to reduce tensions before they spiral out of control. Every new development is analyzed carefully because each side understands how easily a single mistake could trigger a much larger crisis. Many people believe modern conflicts are decided solely on the battlefield, but reality is far more complex. Some of the most important battles take place inside negotiating rooms, financial markets, intelligence agencies, and global supply chains. Military victories can change maps, but economic pressure can reshape political decisions. The side capable of influencing both military and economic realities often gains the greatest strategic advantage. That is why this conflict extends far beyond missiles and military operations. It has become a contest over leverage, perception, economics, and the ability to shape events without allowing the situation to erupt into a much wider regional war. Yet, while much of the world's attention remained fixed on Iran and the Gulf, another flashpoint continued to grow just a few hundred miles away. Along Israel's northern border, a separate confrontation has continued to simmer beneath the headlines. It is a front that has repeatedly threatened to expand into a broader regional conflict, involving Hezbollah, southern Lebanon, and a network of alliances that stretches far beyond either country's borders. To understand where this crisis could go next, we have to leave the waters of the Gulf behind and turn our attention toward Lebanon, where another critical chapter of this story is unfolding. If the Strait of Hormuz represents the economic pressure point of the Middle East, then southern Lebanon represents its military pressure point. While much of the world's attention has remained focused on Iran, another confrontation has continued to unfold along Israel's northern border. It receives far fewer headlines and attracts much less international attention, yet military planners understand something that the average observer often overlooks. A conflict does not need to dominate the news to become dangerous. Sometimes the quietest front becomes the one that changes everything. For years, the border between Israel and Lebanon has remained one of the most heavily monitored regions in the world. Periods of relative calm have repeatedly been interrupted by missile attacks, cross-border operations, and military exchanges. Every ceasefire has reduced the violence, but none has fully resolved the deeper political and security tensions that continue to shape the region. As a result, every new incident raises the same critical question. Is this an isolated event, or the beginning of something much larger? Military commanders on both sides prepare for both possibilities, because in a region where trust is limited, even routine movements can be interpreted as preparations for escalation. One of the biggest reasons this front remains so unpredictable is Hezbollah. Over the past several decades, Hezbollah has evolved into one of the region's most influential non-state armed groups. Its military capabilities, political influence inside Lebanon, and long-standing relationship with Iran have made it a central factor in regional security calculations. At the same time, Hezbollah operates according to its own leadership priorities and strategic objectives. That reality makes diplomacy far more complicated, because even when governments make progress through official negotiations, events on the ground can rapidly reshape the situation and create new challenges almost overnight. Many people think of the conflicts involving Iran, Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, and the Gulf as separate crises unfolding at the same time. In reality, they have become increasingly interconnected. A military operation in one area can influence negotiations taking place somewhere else. A political decision made in one capital can alter security calculations across the entire region. This is why diplomats often describe the Middle East not as a collection of isolated conflicts, but as a complex network where every development has the potential to influence another. Pull one thread, and the entire system begins to move. While soldiers remain on alert, another battle continues far away from the front lines. Diplomats are meeting behind closed doors, while regional governments work to prevent further escalation. Global powers are attempting to balance military support with diplomatic pressure, knowing that neither side wants to appear weak, yet very few are willing to accept the consequences of a much larger regional war. That creates an extremely delicate balance where every public statement, every military exercise, and every diplomatic meeting carries significance far beyond the immediate event. This is no longer simply a military contest. It has become a competition of strategy, patience, political endurance, and careful calculation. History has repeatedly shown that wars are shaped not only by events on the battlefield, but also by what leaders believe is happening beyond it. Perception influences decisions. Decisions influence actions, and actions can ultimately reshape history. That is why governments invest enormous effort into strategic messaging through official statements, public appearances, military announcements, diplomatic initiatives, and carefully managed media coverage. Every image and every message is designed to influence how allies, rivals, and ordinary citizens interpret unfolding events. Sometimes those perceptions help prevent conflict. At other times, they contribute to even greater instability. As the funeral ceremonies come to an end and negotiations continue behind closed doors, the world is left facing an increasingly difficult question. Is the region moving toward greater stability, or is this simply a temporary pause before another crisis begins? No analyst can answer that question with complete certainty. What is clear, however, is that the decisions made over the coming weeks by political leaders, military commanders, and international mediators could shape the future of the Middle East for many years to come. Those decisions will not affect only the countries directly involved. They have the potential to influence global energy markets, international diplomacy, regional alliances, and the broader balance of power around the world. In today's interconnected world, a crisis in one region rarely remains contained for long, and that brings us to the final chapter of this story. When history looks back on moments like these, it rarely remembers the speeches or the headlines that dominated television screens. Instead, history remembers what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. The funeral may be over, the crowds will eventually return home, the flags will come down, and the streets will reopen. But none of the fundamental questions have disappeared. If anything, they have become even more important. For months, the world's attention has been fixed on military operations, political statements, and dramatic images emerging from across the Middle East. Yet the next phase of this crisis will not be decided by symbolism alone. It will be decided by the choices governments make in the days and weeks ahead. Will diplomacy succeed where military pressure has struggled? Can regional powers prevent another round of escalation? Or will one unexpected incident unravel months of delicate negotiations? History has shown time and again that peace agreements are often at their most fragile immediately after they are reached. One mistake, one miscalculation, or one misunderstood signal can change everything. It is easy to think this conflict is happening thousands of miles away and has little connection to everyday life. The reality is very different. In today's interconnected world, no major geopolitical crisis remains confined to one region for long. Energy markets respond almost immediately. Global trade adjusts. Financial markets react. Governments reassess their foreign policies while businesses reconsider investments in supply chains. Even countries with no direct involvement eventually feel the consequences. That is why analysts in Washington, London, Brussels, Beijing, Moscow, and capitals throughout the Middle East continue watching every new development so closely. This is no longer just a regional story. It has become a global one. The next decisive battle may not begin with missiles or military operations. It may begin inside negotiating rooms, where diplomats, intelligence officials, and political leaders attempt to answer one critical question. Can competing interests be managed without triggering another regional war? Military strength can shape events, and economic pressure can influence negotiations, but political decisions ultimately determine whether conflicts expand or come to an end. That has been true throughout history, and it remains true today. History also teaches another important lesson. The greatest danger often comes during periods of uncertainty. When intentions are unclear, rumors spread quickly, markets become volatile, military forces increase their readiness, governments prepare for worst-case scenarios. Sometimes those preparations prevent conflict. At other times, they unintentionally increase the risk of one. That is why every diplomatic meeting, every public statement and every military movement will be examined more closely than ever in the weeks ahead, because any one of them could become the turning point historians look back on years from now. The funeral marked the end of one chapter, but it did not mark the end of the story. The real story is only beginning. The future of regional diplomacy, global energy security, military deterrence, and international alliances will be shaped not by what happened during the ceremony, but by the decisions made after it. Those choices will influence the direction of the Middle East and could have consequences that reach far beyond the region itself. What happens next remains uncertain, and that uncertainty is exactly why the world continues to watch so closely. Now I want to hear your perspective. Most discussions about this crisis focus on the United States, Israel, and Iran. But diplomacy is rarely driven only by the countries making the headlines. Which country do you believe has had the greatest behind-the-scenes influence on this conflict, and why? I am not asking which country is the most powerful. I am asking which one has been quietly shaping events while staying out of the spotlight. Share your thoughts in the comments because I will be reading your responses and featuring some of the strongest insights in a future video. If you enjoy in-depth geopolitical documentaries that go beyond the headlines, be sure to subscribe because the biggest stories are often the ones unfolding where the cameras are not looking.